So dads, happy birthday, or Father's Day, right? I guess you were a father because you had children who were born, so I guess it's kind of a birthday, so to speak, but happy Father's Day to all the fathers. I wore pink just to demonstrate that you can be a dad and you can wear pink and it's okay. Although some people might say, well, that's not really pink, that's salmon. I don't know what your tastes are, but anyways, happy Father's Day. And so in connection with Father's Day, the lesson this morning is entitled Dads, and it's taken from 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verses 16 through 18. Therefore, we do not lose heart. Though outwardly we are wasting away, yet inwardly we are being renewed day by day. For our light and momentary troubles are achieving for us an eternal glory that far outweighs them all. So, we fix our eyes not on what is seen, but on what is unseen. For many, many years, I drove the family to Grandma and Grandpa's house for a summer vacation. I felt a little bit like, what's that guy's name? Chevy Chase, and this was like summer vacation. I forget what was his stage name. Does anybody know? I don't remember right. He had like Christmas ones and winter ones and summer ones, but I felt a little bit like Chevy Chase. I didn't have a station wagon like he did. We just had a larger SUV. But that was my job. So every summer we would go up to my dad and my stepmom's house and vacation with them. And on one particular occasion, and about 3 hours into an 11-hour drive, I realized that I was in a bit of a theology lab. Because a day with a car full of children teaches you a lot about God. Transporting a family from one city to another is like God transporting us from our home to His. And some of life's stormiest hours occur when the passenger and the driver disagree on the route that should be taken. A journey is a journey, whether the destination is to a family reunion or, in our Christian lives, a heavenly home. Both demand of us patience, a good sense of direction, and most importantly, a driver that knows that the fun at the end of the trip is worth the hassles in the middle of it. The fact that my particular pilgrims were all under 10 years of age enriched my learning experience substantially. Because as minutes rolled into hours and our car rolled through the San Joaquin Valley, I began to realize that what I was saying to my children was beginning to have a familiar ring to it. Now, we were driving from Ramona to Redding, California, so it's about an 11-hour drive. And most of that drive is through the San Joaquin Valley, and unless you're an agrarian, there's really not a lot of interesting things to see in the San Joaquin Valley unless you like watching cotton grow or grapes or whatever the harvest might be. But I just remember thinking at the time that some of the things that my children were saying to me, it sounded really familiar, but it didn't sound so familiar like these were questions previously they had been asking because I had heard it before, but I had heard it from God. All of a sudden, the car became a classroom for me. And I realized what I was doing for a few hours is what God has been doing for centuries, encouraging travelers who would rather rest than be on a long ride. For instance, in order to reach the destination, you have to say no to some of the requests. Otherwise, you can imagine the outcome if a parent honored every request of each child during a trip like that. We'd inch our stomachs from one ice cream store to the next. Our priority would be popcorn. Our itinerary would look like a fast food menu. For instance, go to the chocolate malt and make a right, then head north until you find the chili cheeseburger, Stay north for 1,300 calories, and then bear left at the giant pizza. When you see the 2-for-1 chili dog special, take the Pepto-Bismol Turnpike east for 5 convenience stores, and then at the 6th rest stop. I mean, you get what I'm saying, right? You have to say no sometimes. Can you imagine the chaos if every parent indulged every indulgence? Can you imagine the chaos if God indulged each of ours? You see, no is a necessary word to take on a trip. Destination has to reign over the Dairy Queen. In fact, in 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, verse 9, it says, "For God has not destined us to the terrors of judgment, but to the full attainment of salvation through our Lord Jesus Christ." So just note, what is God's destiny for your life? Your destiny is salvation. That's the goal. That's the destination. God's overarching desire is that you reach that destiny. His itinerary includes stops to encourage you on your journey, and he frowns on stops that otherwise would deter you on this journey. And when his sovereign plan for your life and your earthly plan for your own life collide, well, a decision's got to be made. So the question becomes, who's in charge of this journey? And if God's in charge and must choose between your earthly satisfaction and your heavenly salvation, which do you hope he chooses? Right, your heavenly salvation. When I'm in the driver's seat as the dad, I remember that I'm in charge. But when I'm in the passenger seat as a child of my heavenly Father, I forget that sometimes he's in charge. I forget that God is more concerned with my destiny than, let's say, my stomach. And I complain when he says no. Now, I don't want you to get me wrong. I mean, the requests that my children made while on this road trip to their grandma and their grandpa's house, they weren't evil requests. They weren't even unfair requests. They weren't even rebellious requests. In fact, we had a couple of ice cream cones and probably more than a few Cokes between here and Reading. But most of the requests, quite honestly, were unnecessary. But now, my then 5-year-old daughter would have argued that particular fact because from her viewpoint, another soft drink would be indispensable to her happiness. So I know otherwise, and so I say no. And a 40-year-old adult would argue that fact. From his standpoint, let's say, a new boss is indispensable to his happiness. God knows otherwise and says no. Or a 30-year-old woman would argue that fact maybe. From her standpoint, that man with that particular job and that name is exactly who she needs to have to be happy. Her heavenly Father, however, is a lot more concerned that she arrive in his city than at the altar. And so he might say, wait a few miles. There's a much better option down the road. And she protests, like, wait, no, this is the perfect person. How long do I have to wait? Which then takes us to the next point. Children have no concept of minutes or miles, right? So we're driving along. I get asked the question, Dad, when are we going to be there? We'll be there in 3 hours. How long is 3 hours, Dad? I mean, how do you explain time to a child who cannot tell time? So I say, well, it's about as long as 3 Sesame Streets. And in unison, the children groan, 3 Sesame Streets? That's forever. And to them, it is. And to us, sometimes it seems that way too. But he who lives forever, which is what the prophet Isaiah said in Isaiah chapter 57, verse 15, he who lives forever has placed himself at the head of a band of pilgrims who mutter, "How long, O Lord, how long?" And you can read that specific question in Psalm chapter 74, verse 10, and Psalm 89, verse 46. Even David, as a passenger in God's vehicle, was saying, how long is this going to go on? How long must I endure this sickness? How long must I endure this paycheck? But when you think about it sometimes, do you really want God to answer that specific question? Because he could. You know that he could. He could answer them in terms of the here and now with time increments that we would understand, like 3 Sesame Streets. 2 more years on that illness, child, and 10 more years for those bills. But God seldom does that. He usually opts to measure the here and now against the there and the then. And when you compare this life to that life, this life isn't very long. 1 Chronicles chapter 29, verse 15 says, our days on earth are like a shadow. And in Psalm 39, verse 5, each man's life is but a breath. In James chapter 4, verse 14, you are a mist that appears for a little while and then vanishes. And in Psalm 103, verses 15 and 16, as for man, his days are like grass. He flourishes like a flower of the field. The wind blows over it, and it is gone, and its place remembers it no more. So I tell the children, we're getting close. It's a short journey. And I can say that because I know these things. I've been on this journey before. I've been on this trip before. This isn't my first rodeo. We've been doing this every summer. I've driven the road. I've covered this territory. For me, it's not a challenge, but for the children, it's eternal. So I try a different approach with the kids. Okay, kids, just think how fun it'll be when we get there, I say. We're going to be houseboating, we're going to be water skiing, we're going to be swimming, we're going to be fishing the lake. I promise you, kids, when we get there, the trip will have been worth it all. But they still groan. They still complain. Why? Because children can't envision the reward. For me, 11 hours on the road is a very small price to pay for a really terrific vacation. I don't mind the drive because I know the reward that is in store for me. As I drive, I can see Lake Shasta in my mind. I can hear the dinner table laughter. I can smell the smoke from the barbecue. I can endure the journey because I know the destiny. But my children have forgotten the destiny because that was last year. And after all, they're young. Children easily forget. Besides, the road is strange, the night has come, they can't see where we're going. It's my job as their dad to guide them. I try to help them see what they can't see. I try to tell them how we'll play on inner tubes and fish that lake, how they will spend the night under the stars in their sleeping bags. And it seems to work for a while. The grumbling decreases as their vision begins to clear to see the destiny that awaits them. It's as their destiny unfolds. And perhaps then that's how the Apostle Paul, it was his writing that we started this lesson from, maybe that's how Paul stayed motivated. He had a clear vision of the reward. Because let me remind you what he said. Therefore, we do not lose heart. Though outwardly we are wasting away, yet inwardly we are being renewed day by day. For our light and momentary troubles are achieving for us an eternal glory that far outweighs them all. So, we fix our eyes not on what is seen, but on what is unseen. Since what is seen is temporary, but what is unseen is eternal. Again, that's 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verses 16 through 18. You know, it is not easy to get 3 kids the age of 10 or less to see a city that they cannot see. But it's necessary. And sometimes, church, it's not easy for us to see the city we've never seen, especially when the road's bumpy and the hour is late and the companions want to cancel the trip and take up residence in a motel. I mean, it's not easy to fix your eyes on what's unseen, but it's necessary for us to do. And one line in that 2 Corinthians passage really sometimes makes me wonder. Paul says, our light and momentary troubles. Now, if I were Paul, I don't think I would have called them light and momentary. Because if you understand what Paul had been through, I'm not so sure that we would have agreed with his adjectives. Paul has been imprisoned. He's been beaten with a whip 5 times. He has faced death. He's been beaten with rods 3 times. He's been stoned once. He's been shipwrecked 3 times. He's been stranded in the open sea. He's been left homeless. He's been in constant danger, and he is hungry and thirsty. Long and trying ordeals? Yeah, maybe. Arduous and deadly afflictions? That sounds more like it. But light and momentary troubles? I mean, really? How could Paul say that? I mean, how could he describe endless trials with adjectives like, oh, light and momentary? Well, he tells you why. He could see an eternal glory that far outweighs them all. And for some of you, the journey has been long and stormy. I know. We're in times that are stormy. And in no way do I want to minimize at all the difficulties that maybe any one of you have had to face along the way. I mean, some of you have probably shouldered burdens that few of us could ever carry. I mean, you've been robbed of lifelong dreams. You've been given bodies that can't sustain your spirit. You have bills that outnumber your paychecks and challenges that outweigh your strengths. I get it. And you're tired. It's hard for you to see the city in the midst of all these storms. The desire to pull over to the side of the road and get out is very enticing. You want to go on, but some days, honestly, the road just seems way too long. But it's worth it. Because looking back over those early family vacations, once we had arrived, no one ever talked about the trip getting there. No one mentioned the request that I didn't honor. No one grumbled about my foot being on the accelerator when their hearts were focused on banana splits. No one complained about the late hour that we arrived. Yesterday's challenges were lost in today's joy. And that, church, is what I think Paul meant. God never said that the journey was going to be easy, but he did say that the arrival would be worthwhile. God may not always do what you want, but he will do what is right, and he also will do what is best. He's the Father of forward motion. And if you trust him, he will get you home. And the trials of this trip will be lost in the joys of an endless summer. Now, being the dad that I was, I finally smartened up. So after this trip that I just described for you, the next time we took that trip up to Reading, I drove through the night while the children were asleep. And it eliminated a lot of the questions and a lot of the groaning and a lot of the aches and a lot of the pains. It's a little hard on Dad driving through the night, but we got there. So I kind of got a little smarter. But church, you know that the journey is worth it. And I realize that some of the stuff we're going through, even currently, this COVID thing, I mean, for some people, it is like a pain in the neck and wearing the mask and washing your hands and not touching your face and keeping socially distant. But what we have to remember, church, is that we're all on this journey together. And there are some among us who are in a position where their health may be compromised. And so we wear masks not because we feel like bandits. We wear masks so we can protect the people that we love. And so that's why we do some of these things. It's not because any of us wake up in the morning and decide to wear a mask and keep 6 feet away from each other. We just know that if we want to relate together as a family and we really care about the family with whom we're associating, we want to take care of those family members, and so we do. So some of these trials that we go through, it might seem burdensome. It might appear to be a hassle. But the truth of the matter is that eventually the home that we obtain will be worth all those trials and all those tribulations. So dads, happy Father's Day. It's a privilege to be a father. But it comes with a responsibility. Direct your children onto the right path, and when they are older, they will not leave it. And that's good advice for moms, too. And it's good advice for all of us. Keep focused on the path. Stay in that direction. We have a tendency of wanting to veer off one way or the other. But if we'll keep our focus on God and His Son, Jesus Christ, we can be sure that we will arrive safely home. So for the dads, have a terrific day today. We have a song that we're going to sing in conclusion, and then we'll have a final prayer, and then we'll be dismissed. Let's stand, if you would, please, and let's sing.